My name is Clara Moreau, and I am 31 years old. I never believed 3 ordinary words could redraw the map of a life. Yet that is precisely what occurred on a crisp autumn evening in our family home on the outskirts of Berlin, when my father, Heinrich Moreau, looked at me with a calm, rehearsed distance and said, "Vacate the room." The sentence arrived without anger, without raised voice, just cold finality, like a judge reading a sentence already decided in chambers. My younger brother, Lucas, had just pulled into the driveway with his wife, Sophie, both radiant from the ultrasound photos they carried like trophies. The house seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of their arrival, the air thick with unspoken celebration. I stood in the kitchen doorway, still holding a damp dish towel from washing up after dinner, convinced for a split second that I had misheard. But I hadn't. Heinrich's grey eyes remained steady, unblinking. Sophie offered no cushion. She tilted her head with a faint, practiced smile and murmured, "It would be better if you left the house altogether." The words landed heavier than any shout. In that instant, something inside me fractured, not with noise, but with absolute quiet. A clean break. There had been signals, of course. Conversations that hushed when I entered a room. Plans sketched on calendars without my name. Family dinners where my chair felt slightly farther from the center. I had told myself these were temporary tensions, family weather, not demolition. Blood, I believed, granted immunity from permanent exile. I was mistaken. Heinrich spoke of space and temporary adjustments and understanding the new circumstances, but the syllables rang empty. The house on Lindenstrasse was not merely shelter, it was my anchor. For 15 years I had worked double shifts in a logistics firm, saved every euro, paid the mortgage installments when Heinrich's pension fell short after his early retirement, repaired the leaking roof, maintained the garden, and quietly covered bills when Lucas needed help starting his small graphic design business. None of that registered now. A new order had been established, and I had been demoted to outsider. Humiliation has its own temperature, cold burn, invisible scars. It changes breathing. I nodded once, because dignity sometimes wears silence like armor. I walked upstairs to the small room at the end of the hall, my childhood bedroom, later my adult refuge, and began to pack. Each folded sweater felt like an involuntary goodbye. Each emptied drawer asked the same silent question: how does one become disposable in the place that shaped you? Downstairs, laughter rose like perfume, careful joy, the glow of impending parenthood. No footsteps followed me. No voice protested the injustice. The walls that had echoed my first words now observed my departure without objection. When I carried the final suitcase to the front door, Heinrich did not look up from his newspaper. Sophie leaned against the hallway arch, relaxed, almost regal. Lucas murmured something about calling me later, a thin thread of concern already frayed by guilt. I stepped into the October evening. Jasmine from the neighbor's garden mixed with the sharp scent of betrayal. The door closed behind me with gentle finality, softer than any slam. And just like that, after 31 years, I was no longer resident of the only home I had known. The first night in a cheap pension room near Alexanderplatz was not painful from discomfort. It was disbelief. I replayed the evening in loops, hunting for logic in the illogical. Rejection seldom declares its real motives. It hides behind practicality, timing, the greater good. But beneath the excuses, I sensed something older, a quiet reordering of value. Lucas and Sophie represented continuity, legacy, the future. I had become the past, useful once, expendable now. I kept distance. Pride blocked calls home. Pain blocked forgetting. Days blurred into a grey routine of work, cheap meals, and staring at ceilings. Then whispers reached me through distant relatives and mutual acquaintances. The house on Lindenstrasse had grown unnaturally quiet. No more celebratory dinners. No baby announcements shared on family chats. Tension seeped out like damp through walls. Raised voices at night. Unease in every phone call. A few weeks later, the silence shattered. My Aunt Elise rang late one evening, voice shaking. Something terrible had happened. The newborn, a girl they named Lena, had gone missing. Not abducted in some cinematic nightmare, not lost in a park. Simply, gone from her crib one morning, hours after Sophie swore she had checked. Police came. Questions. Accusations turned inward. Sophie unraveled first, convinced some family curse had been triggered by the disharmony of that autumn evening. Irrational, yes. But fear rarely consults reason. Heinrich, once unshakable patriarch, became a shadow. Sleepless, pacing, suddenly small. Lucas withdrew into silence, guilt compounding. The household that had so confidently declared my presence inconvenient now drowned in paranoia. Then came the colder blow, not emotional, but legal. A lawyer arrived one grey Tuesday, briefcase in hand, documents crisp. No drama, only precision. The house, it turned out, had never been the fortress Heinrich believed. Years earlier, in a moment of financial strain, he had taken a second mortgage against it, quietly, without telling anyone. Payments lapsed during Lucas's startup struggles, which I had helped cover. Interest compounded. Notices ignored. Liens accumulated. The property was never fully in clear title. An old inheritance clause from my grandparents' estate had left unresolved shares. When the bank finally moved, the process was swift and merciless. No appeals succeeded. Within days, foreclosure papers were served. The house was seized. They became homeless. When the news reached me, through a neutral email from the lawyer, I felt no surge of triumph. Only a heavy, reflective stillness. Revenge requires intent. This was indifferent consequence. The universe had not conspired for my sake. It had simply enforced realities Heinrich had long ignored while wielding authority over me. I saw them weeks later, not in the familiar hallway, but in a cramped rented flat on the edge of Kreuzberg, offered temporarily by distant cousins. The change was stark. Heinrich looked a decade older, shoulders stooped, voice thin. Lucas kept his eyes down, shame etched deep. Sophie, once quick with mockery, now carried the vacant stare of someone hollowed by loss, grief, and self-reproach. No one mentioned that October evening. No apologies surfaced. Some truths are too heavy for words. Yet the air held everything unspoken. Power is temporary. Security conditional. Cruelty, even when it feels justified in the moment, often returns in unrecognizable disguise. What struck deepest was not their collapse, but how fragile the structures we mistake for permanent truly are. A room, a house, authority, all can vanish with terrifying speed. The life that expelled me had crumbled under its own hidden fractures, not through fate's drama, but because reality keeps precise ledgers. If this account holds any lesson, it is simple. Never gauge your worth by the comfort of those willing to discard you. Stability erected on exclusion is never stable. Authority without empathy is always on borrowed ground. And the floor beneath arrogance is thinner than it appears. Months later, I rented a small flat in Prenzlauer Berg. Nothing grand, just walls, light, quiet. I rebuilt slowly. Work continued. Friendships deepened. I learned to breathe without the weight of belonging to a place that no longer wanted me. Sometimes, late at night, I think of that dish towel still in my hand the evening everything shifted. I think of the door closing softly. And I think of the house that once stood so certain, now gone. Not because I willed it, but because consequences arrive exactly when excuses run out. Life redraws borders quietly. And sometimes, the ones redrawn are not yours.